Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Sam's Healing Podcast. Today, I'm joined by a viewer favorite, and if you are tuning in via video, you already see someone who comes in quite often, has a thriving practice. Her name is Amanda Asproni. Amanda, how are you on this post-Thanksgiving day?
Good, thank you.
So today, we're going to talk about something that has become a common term that is out there in pop psychology, TikTok, Instagram. It is becoming something that is thrown out a lot by people that may not completely understand what it truly means and what it truly looks like. And that is the term trauma bond. So as we start today, what is a trauma bond truly?
So truly a trauma bond is when someone is in a relationship. It can be a romantic relationship, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a family relationship. It could be a friendship where the predominant features of the relationship are actually toxic. So the positives of the relationship are far outweighed by the negative, yet the relationship continues.
So, okay. Nice, broad definition, enough to get us in a whole lot of trouble. But so what does it look like? Because a lot of people could say, well, wait a minute, my spouse has been unfaithful several times over. That's not very positive. That's unhealthy. That's painful and traumatizing. So what does an actual trauma bond look like? Or asked a little bit more of a clinical way, what does it look like when you are trauma bonded to someone?
So when clients first come in, and you know this, it's a lot of initial psychoeducation. And yes, trauma bonding is now a term that we have to add to that, along with the other things that clients always start out with, sex addiction. My spouse is a narcissist, love bombing. They're using all these psychology terms that, they hear all over the place and they mean well, but they can actually do themselves a lot of disservice. So trauma bonding now is on that list. When the couple comes in, it's going to look like trauma bonding because they're in the aftermath of infidelity. And yes, they have found out their spouse has been unfaithful, maybe once, maybe it's a serial situation, but it's chaos and there's a lot of negativity in the relationship. So the first thing you're going to do is screen whether or not these toxic traits and toxic patterns of relating have been there before their disclosure. Is this something that has been there since the infancy of the relationship?
Kind of asked this way, has the relationship always been like this? Is that fair?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that it can matter, but it cannot matter. So sometimes they're going to tell you, no, the relationship actually was great before this. We've never interacted this way before. Okay. Are they still trauma bonded? Sure. Because the relationship negativity is outweighing the positivity. It's unhealthy. It could be that they say the relationship has always been like this. That also does not automatically mean that the couple should file for divorce.
Right. So when you are in a relationship with someone, well, let me read you something that someone sent me, and let's see if we can't put a picture to what and how. We're smiling a lot today and being kind-hearted because it's nice to take a deep breath from the trauma and the overwhelmment that those who are dealing with infidelity struggle with. But there's nothing funny about a trauma bond, and we both know that. Trauma bonds hurt like hell. Your life takes on a whole different filter. It's like a filter is placed over your entire life when you're trauma bonded to someone. But someone wrote this recently, Sam, I can't stop this relationship. No matter what I do, I try to break free. The way he treats me is absurd. The way he speaks to me is demeaning and devaluing, as you have talked about in your podcast. But at the very glimmer of hope, I come back and he sucks me back in. And no matter what I do, I can't seem to break free. But I know he treats me harshly, and I know that it's painful. But I just can't stop. You tell me not to text him, but we get in texting battles for hours at a time. You tell me to set a boundary, and he seemingly runs over my boundary like a freight train. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry for not listening to you, but I can't stop. Is that a picture of what a trauma bond might look like?
Yes, it's highly addictive. So intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful form of addiction that the brain can latch onto. And what that means is what she said in the message to you, sometimes he treats me nicely. That's intermittent reinforcement. So all of the research says if a lab rat knows that it might get, they do studies with heroin or other drugs, if they might get heroin every time they tap the lever, not every time, but maybe once every 50, 75, that creates the most powerful form of addiction. Not consistent dosage, but intermittent. So he's intermittently kind to her or loving to her. That's going to give her more hope. That's going to make her more trauma bonded.
Or even intermittently kind, or intermittently just moderately respectful. It doesn't have to be, as you dropped another term, right? It doesn't have to be this big love bombing, because some people can think, well, they're not love bombing me. They're just being nice. And just the mere fact of them being nice is enough to keep them in the cycle. Is that fair?
Not being totally neglected, not being totally abused. I mean, then we say, this is horrible, but you can get out of a really toxic relationship and then you're excited because your next relationship, it isn't that bad. Well, okay, now you've gone from the basement to the sidewalk, but it doesn't mean that you're in a really healthy relationship, but it's a lot better because your bar was so low.
Right, because the bar was so low. Why do we, I'm going to ask you two questions and then let you run with them. Number one is, why do we set the bar so low? Number two, why is a trauma bond so addictive?
Well, why is a trauma bond so addictive, I guess, is only answered by why is the brain the way that it is? I don't know why. I know that it is the most addictive form of reinforcement to the brain. I think it could be rooted in anticipation. So think about when you're anticipating something positive, the more you're anticipating it, the more you're wanting it. If you don't know exactly when it's going to come, think about Christmas morning, right? The difference between if you get something positive every day, okay, well, that gift is coming every day, but Christmas morning is so much about anticipation. You don't know what you're going to find under the tree. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing when it's used in a negative or a abusive, destructive way. But I want to say that still doesn't mean you need to leave the relationship. So I want to demonize the term. Because if you come out of an abusive relationship and now you've had reactive abuse and you get into a relationship with someone that is healthy, I mean, you can still have negative ways of relating that you're trying to work out and break free from that are a byproduct of your past abusive relationship. Does that mean that you should just give up on the current relationship? No. If you have someone who knows what's happening and they're trying to work on it, that's different. So if your client's partner can come out of those episodes and say, I'm so sorry, I know that that's not the way that I should be treating you. I'm really working on this. Thank you so much for putting up with this. You don't deserve this. That's a totally different situation than someone who won't own it, won't be accountable, isn't doing anything to really try and change it.
So empathy, humility, a desire to do their work, a desire to work on themselves, a desire to be corrected or even adjusted if they are being harsh. So, okay, now, what's the difference between being trauma bonded to someone versus being in a relationship that is just hard as hell because of family of origin, because of infidelity or addiction? And how does someone know if they are really trauma bonded or if the relationship is just going through a real difficult season? How do you help them delineate between the two?
I have really deep conversations with both parties, one-on-one, and then also in couples work. And then sometimes I refer them out to other clinicians so that I can then get a secondary opinion because, clinicians, coaches, we have a lot of power. You don't just want to be telling your clients, oh, well, you should just throw in the towel. This is hopeless. I mean, ultimately, people come to us if they're still in a relationship because they're trying to salvage it. So you're going to take a history of the relationship for the couple that you're dealing with. You're also going to go into the family of origin of the person who has a problem with being unkind or neglectful or avoidant. Are they willing to go into their family of origin and start to look around to say, hey, why am I like this? Where did I learn these patterns of relating? Where are they coming from? How am I projecting these things onto my spouse from wherever it was originally birthed in either my family of origin or some kind of abuse or some kind of past relationship? Are they willing to do that kind of work?
Because if they're constantly blaming the betrayed or constantly blaming the other party, if they're putting all of the responsibility on that party, one could very easily say that person sounds really unsafe, right?
Right. They're completely defended. So the clinician's job is, to be long suffering. We are supposed to be believers of change. So to be patient with the client and give them chances to come back, to do the right thing, to learn a new behavior, to learn how to take ownership, to be vulnerable and say, oh my gosh, that was horrible. What in the world just happened? I mean, if your client can start doing that, then they're headed in the right direction and that's ultimately what their partner wants. Because remember, really, they're trying to salvage the relationship. It's a disaster. That's why they're coming to us. But we don't want to give up too soon. So you're looking for that internal motivation and that accountability, and how hard will they work?
So your relationship can be a disaster, but that doesn't mean that you're trauma bonded to your partner, right?
Your relationship can be a disaster. You can be trauma bonded to your partner, but it doesn't mean that you cannot heal and become a healthy relationship.
So when you've got a couple, okay, so let's run with that. You've got a couple, their relationship is a disaster. They are trauma bonded, but they're both willing. And they're both like, look, we just scream and yell and fight, but I really want her and I really want him, but I also want to punch him in their face a couple of times a week. So how do you help that couple? What is the recipe for growth for a couple that is in that type of kind of, bombastic, up and down, unpredictable relationship?
I'm laughing because you have to interject humor. You want to de-shame the situation. So if there's a lot of shame, you can't push that client into accountability or ownership because there's so much shame. So with my clients who are living this, when there are positive interactions, when both can let their guards down and take ownership and really truly show each other cross empathy, I mean, I will make jokes like, oh my gosh, you guys are adulting at the very same moment at the same time, right? Or, oh, you completely just own that. Like you just put your big boy shoes on, so you can joke around because you want to de-shame it. You understand that you're trying to help this person grow up. This is developmental trauma. That's all it is. So you're trying to help this person grow up. And so using humor, de-shaming, and saying it's progress, not perfection. You're not going to just snap your fingers overnight and not ever do this behavior again. And that helps them own the behavior instead of defending and deflecting every time they do it because they think they have to be perfect.
So would you agree with this, that in situations, it's going to require boundaries, but it's going to require, and this is a controversial statement, but I believe it to be true with all my heart, that it's going to require boundaries on both parties, that it is easy to assume that the betrayed should have a boundary with the unfaithful to say, hey, this is acceptable, this is not, I'm not going to tolerate this type of behavior. But isn't it fair that the unfaithful should also have a boundary that says, hey, let's give practical examples. If you put your hands on me, I'm calling a timeout. Or if you're unreachable, if I cannot get you, if I cannot connect with you, and I'm not yelling and screaming, but I'm really trying to be empathetic, I'm really trying to be kind, I'm really trying to affirm, but you're just unreachable. Isn't there a point where instead of marathoning for hours at a time, that the unfaithful should say, we need to take a timeout. I'll be back in an hour. I'll be back in maybe 2 hours if it's really bad. I'll be back in 30 minutes, but we need to self-soothe. We need to decompress because none of us are in our adult prefrontal cortex. Would you agree with that?
Yes. So trauma bonding, as you just noted, can go both ways. A betrayed spouse can be acting out in ways that then the relationship is showing there's a high amount of trauma bonding. And that is, right, the betrayed spouse who is constantly shaming and devaluing and attacking, sometimes physically, sometimes just verbally, sometimes both. Yeah. So that's then, a trauma bonded relationship where there's a lot of negativity. It can be somewhat dangerous. And the unfaithful spouse, is really struggling. And you do want to encourage boundaries with empathy and also with an understanding that the betrayed spouse, again, on a certain level, there's this big debate like, oh, they're doing it on purpose. I mean, if they were imaged, right, once their brain floods, they're gone. So what's the best way to try to get them grounded? If they can respond to those grounding techniques, again, then you have someone who's really willing. I mean, they're struggling with a real problem of containment. And these are people who, when they're in their right mind, these are the real fighter personalities, right? These are the game changers in life, in the world. So you don't want to demonize the entire personality.
Well, in my book, good buddy James and Near, who we do Ask the Unfaithful with, he says that when a man or woman has infidelity disclosed to them, that is an assumption that they have PTSD. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And what is PTSD? Combat veteran is home. He's at the movies with his best friend. Something happens in the movie that sounds like a bomb going off. And what is he going to do? He's going to try to kill his best friend. Is that intentional? No. So it's similar.
So for the unfaithfuls that are watching, it would be safe to say they might be thinking, my betrayed male or female is trying to shame me, trying to harass me, attack me, trying to diminish every effort I've ever made, devalue and degrade. Is it fair to say it may seem like it, it may sound like it, but they're having a trauma response, and so you just assuming that that's their heart's intent is not accurate?
Yeah, it's talking about the heart's intent. If they can calm down and they're no longer flooding, so frontal cortex back online, then you can figure out, okay, where's their heart? So really what could be happening is they're having a trauma response to getting cheated on, which makes them feel totally devalued. It makes them feel like they're worthless. That behavior speaks volumes, right, of negativity to the betrayed spouse. And so then they're shoving it into their unfaithful spouse's face and they're confused. But really, sometimes it's the betrayed spouse giving back to the unfaithful spouse verbally what it feels like to get cheated on. So you have to be able to get under the iceberg when both are calm and then back to getting at their hearts. If the betrayed spouse can say, I'm so sorry, I'm ashamed of how I talked to you, okay, then you're getting somewhere. But you have some cases where they will not do that. That's when red flags go up.
Well, and throughout this whole entire conversation is the truth that if you're trying to heal from infidelity, you need an expert. You need someone like Amanda, guys. You just can't DIY this. I appreciate you wanting to read a few articles and wanting to watch some videos. I happen to know a guy who's made a lot of videos over 13 years that you could sit and watch those for hours and they could really help you. But you cannot DIY this. You really need the help of an expert like Amanda or so many other clinicians that I bring on. You just can't wing it. But as we are about done, for someone that's in a trauma bond and the other person is unsafe, unkind, and they really need to break free, what are some things that partner can do to break free of the trauma bond when they know they've got to get out of this addictive spiral that they keep getting caught in?
Sometimes they need to go out for specific trauma treatment like EMDR, ETT, neurofeedback, some kind of experiential intensive. You want to be able to help them pattern any past relationships that also have trauma bonding in them, because that reinforces that bond in the current relationship. And so you want to go and break those. And then also trying to help them work towards building a sense of self and building something outside of the relationship, because then the primary relationship, the trauma bonded one, loses some of that power If they have a life built outside of that, where they do have really enriching relationships, they have really good community, they're taking really good care of themselves so they can feel strong and they can feel supportive, because it's hard to break out of the relationship because generally speaking, the other party doesn't want that and they're not going to have a positive reaction to it.
So the person trying to break free needs boundaries, needs a life outside of the relationship, needs to break free of some unhealthy bonds, maybe with parental figures or caregivers, right? Is that a very common scenario that makes someone vulnerable to trauma bonding?
Yes, but I don't want to put everything on the parents, because you could have a situation where there's been undisclosed abuse in the client's childhood or even loss. So in some cases, if they had a wonderful relationship with a parent and then the parent died, like that can be another reason that someone would stay in a relationship that's trauma bonded, because trauma triggers trauma. If you end a relationship, even if it's toxic, it's going to trigger any significant losses from your past, positive and negative.
It makes great sense. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I know those that are struggling to identify, am I trauma bonded or am I just going through a difficult time, are thankful as well. So, and I did give that little plug for the fact that we really need to be working with experts. So if you're open to new clients and if they fit kind of your criterion, how can someone reach out to you? How can they find you if they're interested in possibly working with you?
You could email me at amanda@healingaffairscounseling.com.
Well, as always, thank you so much for coming in. I continue to get wonderful email and great comments from even my own clients of just your wisdom and kindness and the ability to de-shame so many difficult scenarios, but also to normalize the fact that this is hard. And just because it's hard, it doesn't mean that something's wrong with the unfaithful or the betrayed or both. If I can help, you can reach out to me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com. And as we say goodbye today, remember, it may not be as impossible as it feels. If you can get to the right people, you can get the right pathway to healing. I don't know about your relationship, but I know that you can be healed. And at the end of the day, what's more important than your own healing? And one of the best ways to either break free of a trauma bond or prevent a trauma bond is by focusing on your own healing and your own personal restoration. So as always, have a great day. Amanda, thanks for coming in.